Lined up, everything's good there.
Oh, great.
And maybe some, I mean, you had some, uh, your,
That's the even when the water was coming up, we got in the boat. In fact, when I got up, Pop called in that morning and said the water's broken through.
okay, hold on.
Yeah.
We're not recording. So you can't tell any stories. Well, let's just first start with the formalities. Tell me your name.
My name is David Wayne Stucker.
How do you spell that?
Stucker.
Okay, David Wayne. Okay.
Wayne.
Okay, and where are we?
We're here in my apartment at 2113 Vernon Court, Louisville, Kentucky.
Okay, good. Alrighty. Uh, and today is,
November the 28th, 2008.
good. Alright, it's all documented. Well, first let's just start out with, we're going to talk a little bit more about you, and tell me, just to warm up with, Ike and Jenny Mother, your father and your mother, and
Uh-huh.
the circumstances of them getting to know each other and having you as a kid.
Can we just hold for just a second? I'm sorry. I'm okay. Speak.
Call it in the Army field expedience.
Yes, that's the name of the game. Actually, he's good at this, so he's got a chance of making it. Do you have to, like, music stands? What? Okay, so we were talking about Ike in Virginia. Is that what you called her, Virginia?
Jen.
Jen, okay.
She asked me to call her Jen because she was 17 when I was born, and she didn't want her boyfriends to know she had a baby. That's the only way I could think of it.
Huh.
So she became Jen. And I never saw my father until I was about 7 or 8 years old. And he said, here he comes. And I said, who? He says, your father. And he said, watch him start limping. And Ike was quite a baseball player when he was young. And he was set to go play for the Louisville team. He and a pitcher named Mike Shane. And but Mike turned out to be a drunk. And Ike hurt his leg jumping the fence for a ball. And so he wore a brace after that, and that shot his baseball career. But anyway, uh, that was about the only thing I knew about Ike for a long, long time. And so my grandmother and grandfather practically, well, they raised me uh, while Jen dated other men to find a father for me or a stepfather for me. Actually, I had an aunt, Kate, who had she was a great aunt, was a sister of my great grandma Becker, who married my great great grandfather George Cook, and her name was Anna, and they're all buried over at the Cave Hill Cemetery, the whole family. And Kate was brought over as an indentured servant, and then she worked alongside of her sister, my great great grandma, in the slaughterhouse twisting weenies. And so after she worked off her indentureship, she thought she was an American citizen, so she voted the Republican Party for God knows how long until the war came along. And Dot, my aunt, uh, found said, "Hey, she's a German national." So she called the FBI, and they came up and
Just get it.
fingerprinted Kate, and said, okay, she's legal now. But that was the way Kate was, and Kate was the most wonderful woman you'd ever come across. She taught me to count in German, and the German ABCs. All I can remember now is ABC, and I can remember 21 is von 20. And the only thing I can remember about speaking in German is something like verdammte Hund, it means damn dog, and a couple of other things, but I won't put on tape. Anyway, everybody in the family worked when I was growing up, and even though it was a depression, they were working. And I was left alone with Kate, and she was in her late 70s at that time and on crutches. Uh, she made different soup every day. And one day it was vegetable, the next day barley, maybe chicken, but mostly beef, because we lived in front of a slaughterhouse. And she'd say, Dolphin, go down and get me an oxtail. And they cut me a tail of a cattle and then chopped it up, So, and a oxtail or a cow tail has got the greatest bone marrow in the world. So it's all marrow, and the soup would be always just outstanding. So anyway, she lived to be 92 years old. I think I was about in my 20s when she died. So that was
Okay.
the two people that raised me.
So how did you? I mean, I guess when by the time you became at least 3 or 4, maybe 5. Uh, so I mean, you probably had other friends that had a father figure in the house. I mean, how was it explained to you that Ike was not there, or
Uh,
or
it never. No, I don't even recall anything like that. I know Jimmy Cornell, one of my closest friends. Uh, he lived with his father, but he couldn't stand him. And they had about 14 kids and lived in a two-bedroom apartment, so you can imagine what life was like in that house. And then my closest friend from the third grade on through high school was Joe Knight, and his father was a drunk, and he would take us to school sometimes, drive us to school, and when we went to Manual. But finally, or rather, Fern and his wife just finally up and divorced him. But there for a long time, if we wanted to go to a show at night, we had to get on our bicycles and find Big Joe, Joe's daddy, and get the money from him on a Saturday while he was sitting there boozing it up with some other woman and take it home. And then Fern, his mother, would give him the money for the show.
mhm.
Sometimes I had to do the same thing with Pop, but Pop was pretty good. He stayed in the local saloons. We didn't have to go all over the city. There was about 3 of them in the city, all we had to go for. And they were all on Story Avenue.
Okay.
But that was life down in those days.
Okay. So as far as just to continue a little bit on with Ike and Jen, so were they pretty adversarial the rest of their life, or did they
No,
stay?
Lord, no. I mean, Ike was one of those kind of guys. Well, Hugh Morton one time. He couldn't, that's Dot's husband. They were going to the ball game. And there was Hugh, his one son-in-law, Ike, another ex-son-in-law, and Clarence, his current son-in-law. And all three of them, all four of them, were sitting there reading, passing the paper back and forth, going to the baseball game together. So it was one of those things where, hey, it's just
But where
life.
was Jen and all that?
She was home.
But that's why I was asking. Did she have hard feelings towards him, or did they?
No, I mean, I think it was a shotgun wedding. In fact, I know it was. They were married in April, and I was born in August.
Mm-hmm.
So uh, that was the way things were in those days, and come to find out, Dot was too.
Mm-hmm.
uh, Bob and Pop were married in April, and Dot was born in end of January. So we both had a big laugh out of it being a couple of bastards
Well,
as we looked up the genealogy.
well, wow.
So
So did he ever live with you?
no,
Okay.
no. I only saw him that one time. Then I saw him a couple of times. We'd be up the drugstore shooting a pinball machine or something, and he didn't want me to say that he was. He didn't want to acknowledge me as his son because he was dating other younger women, and they didn't want some guy with a kid. That's the way it was. It didn't bother me. It didn't bother anybody. That was life, and he gave me 20 pieces of candy. He went off for a penny off a punch board, and 15 cents for car fare to go to Bear Junior High School back and forth. And that's a total sum of total assets he's given me all of my life. Never paid alimony or child support.
Was that common back then, or was that unheard of? As
That was,
far as when two people had, a child was born and they split, did the man, or
I don't know, to be honest with you. Most of the other kids, their parents were were living with them.
Right.
The father was living with them, and for better or worse. And most all the men drank in those days for some reason or other. I don't know. And they all stopped off for a beer after work in their favorite saloon. Uh, Joe's father, I mean, in fact, he got a divorce, and when we were in our teens, and Fern married a man not too long after that, and but it didn't matter to the kids at all. It seemed, hey, we're having our own life, we're doing our own thing. We more or less raised ourselves in those days because everybody was working in the family. Kate was my only anchor there. I did have my great grandma and great grandpa living next door. And incidentally, my earliest recollection of her is sitting on her kneecap when I was about 3 years old, and she would stick stale cinnamon kuka in a cup of coffee and then let me chew on it, you know. And that was so good, and I still love that to this day. Great grandma Hensel was also a healer. She could breathe out fire if you burned yourself. I pulled a bucket of water, boiling water over on me one day when I was a little kid, and got my whole arm and shoulder. And they just ran me right over to her, and she started breathing, and I didn't even have so much as a blister. Ronnie, my first cousin, was a bleeder when he was circumcised, and they couldn't stop him bleeding. She came, they quick rushed him down there to Grandma Hensel, and she bled over him. There's some passage in Deuteronomy.
You said bled over him?
She prayed over him. I'm sorry. Prayed over him as passage from Deuteronomy. I think I saw thee lying in the gutter, choking on your blood. And anyway, the bleeding stopped. So we kind of gave her a wide berth too. We didn't know what he could do. And Grandpa Cook was also known as a healer. So there was great laying on of hands in those days, I think.
Well, tell me, when you were 7, run me through like a typical day. How would you start it, and what would be like a school day?
A school day. Well, normally Pop would holler upstairs, and Pop would get up early in the morning before everybody. And
What time?
I'm sorry.
What time?
7 o'clock, 6:30, 7 o'clock, and he'd go up to Weber's grocery store and get a couple of kukas and bring them home. And then he hollers, and Kate would holler and get up, you know, time for breakfast. And I'd have to get up. I had the bedroom all by myself with this big 4-poster bed, and which Alan has now. He shouldn't have had it. Anyway, I'd come down there, and of course we had stove heat in those days. We didn't central heating or anything. And so that fire would be going, and that stove would be cherry red, and I'd sit in that cherry, just not coal stove, yeah. And so I would have breakfast and then go on off to school. When I come home, or when I would come home from school, my job was to go down to the coal shed and chop coal up enough so it would get into the stoves and kindling wood, and bring 2 buckets of coal up every night. We had 2 stoves, one in the kitchen and one in the dining room. And it had a transom cut so that he could come up to my room. And that would be my chores. And my Aunt Kate, I had a wonderful Uncle Will, one of Grandma Hensel's sons. And he was a butcher, and he and Kate were just fast friends as well. And he would leave Kate 2 shots of whiskey every day, you know, because all the butchers carried a half a pint in their pocket. They stop off at Weber's liquor store, and they get whiskey so they could stay warm during the day while they were killing cattle. And there wasn't any heat in the slaughterhouse. It wasn't worth that much. Anyway, and Kate would say, in under the mantle, where she would hide the whiskey, and I'd go in there, and there was a little doily hanging down over a mantle. push back was a shock like, and then there'd be a shot of whiskey, and I'd drink that whiskey and go, wipe the tears out of my eyes, and wouldn't have a chaser of water or anything. But that got me warmed up all over again. So I was introduced to beer and whiskey at a very young age.
How old?
Oh hell, 4 or 5. I remember I had my tonsils taken out when I was 5 years old, and brought me home. I said I was thirsty, and Pop gave me beer and pretzels, and started me bleeding all over again. And he started beating up on poor Pop. He said he was hungry and thirsty. So, but there was always beer, and Kate would give me a bucket when I was 5 or 6 years old. He'd give me a nickel and had some on me up to Orders Brewery. They said, "Get some beer. We'll have beer this afternoon." And they had cold beer on tap, and I'd run home with it without trying to spill any of it. And we'd drink most of the bucket of beer before Mom and Pop got home. So they were happy days, I can tell you, with that beer and all that.
So, what were the drinking habits amongst the women? Were they the same as the men? As
No.
far as the day?
No, the women were always supposed to be pure. But Mom would have a shot of whiskey. Don't think she wouldn't. All of them drank. And
Once a week or
every day.
oh, every day.
They always had a drink. And I remember when I would feel bad in the wintertime or something like that, they thought nothing of giving me a hot toddy, age 2 and 3 and 4, which was whiskey and water with sugar in it. And it was hot water. And man, I tell you, you'd get a sip of that and you'd go right to sleep no matter how sick you were. And I still love them to this day. And that was a culture in those days.
Well, how did that change? So when you were started getting in your teenage years, you were like 13. That would have been, say, 1942, 43.
42 or 3, yeah. 3.
What would your typical day at that point be?
Oh, well,
Did you still have coal? Yeah, you still had the coal stove. Sorry.
yeah. Yeah. And no, I think by that time we had a gas stove. Yeah. And we still had a coal stove in the kitchen. But that later turned into a gas stove as well, a gas furnace. Anyway, in those days, I started playing clarinet when I got to junior high school. I was 13. And
How did that come?
well, we were in the 6th grade, and that was elementary then, and the 7th, 8th, and 9th was junior high, even though the 9th grade was the first year of high school. And so a counselor from Barrett Junior High came down, Miss Detchen, and she says, well, you have electives up there now. You have one period a day where you can either take choir, glee club, orchestra, or band. And or you can have 2 study periods and 2 science classes. And I said, hell, I don't want to study. And Joe said, I don't either. He says, let's go in the band. So we didn't know one instrument from the other. So we knew we had to take the instruments home 30 times during the semester in order to get the B for your band. And also 30 times the next semester to get chevrons for your sweater. So he said, what do you want to play? And he said, I don't know. I said, go over and pick your instrument. So I walked over, and both of us picked up piccolos. Came back. We got too many piccolos. There could come another one. So we picked up flutes. Too many flutes. So I picked up a clarinet, and number 103 out of the box, and Joe picked up 104. Okay, we need clarinets. So that's how I got to play clarinet. And I wasn't worth a damn at all. And then Mr. Marker left for another school, and Mr. Emberger came in. And he was a heck of a nice guy. I really liked him. In fact, he wanted to adopt me almost. And if I had it, I'd been a music store owner now. Anyway, he used to get Joe and me and take it out after lunch and take us back in the back of the auditorium. We'd smoke a cigarette. and he'd be puffing right along with us. You know, I said, "I know you two smoke." And anyway, uh, he said, and then this Miss Keller, by the time I was 15, going on 14 rather, I went into the ninth grade, and then Miss Keller, who was a teacher up there, I thought she was the meanest thing in the world. Never had her. And I walked in her room, and all she could was look at me. And I said, "Oh my God, I'm dead," and everything. Turned out that I looked a lot like a dear nephew of hers who was flying an airplane over in Burma, a bomber uh, out of Burma, and against the Japanese. And uh, so she came down to the house, and she just imposed herself, and she became a surrogate aunt. And so she paid for clarinet lessons. And so Joe came along with me. And so we were getting 2 clarinet lessons for